The man Victoria feared most returned. And Daniel was the first person he destroyed. She had stared down billionaires. She had survived public humiliation so devastating it would have broken most people permanently. She had even defeated Warren Cole, a man who had weaponized money, influence, and cruelty all at once. But the moment Victoria's fingers turned over that single faded photograph, every ounce of strength she had spent years building disappeared from her face like smoke in wind. Daniel had never seen her look like that, not once, not even during the worst moments of everything they had survived together. He had watched her walk into rooms full of people who wanted to destroy her and never even blink. He had watched her face Warren Cole directly and hold her ground without flinching. But now she was standing in her own living room, holding a photograph with both hands, and she looked like a woman who had just seen her own ghost. Victoria. He said her name carefully, the way you speak to someone standing too close to the edge of something. Talk to me. She didn't answer immediately. She simply stared at the photograph. Then, with a stillness that frightened him more than any tears would have, she set it face down on the table and said the words that changed everything. If Richard has found me, none of us are safe anymore. Daniel waited for more. There was nothing more. She walked to the window, wrapped her arms around herself, and stared into the dark street below like she was already watching for something terrible to arrive. Before we dive any deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. The name Richard Hayes meant nothing to Daniel that night. He turned it over in his mind like a coin he couldn't identify. Richard Hayes. He searched his memory for a face, a story, a rumor, anything Victoria might have mentioned in all the months he had known her. There was nothing. Whoever this man was, Victoria had buried him so completely that not even a shadow of him had ever escaped into conversation. What Daniel did know was this. In all the time he had spent beside Victoria, through every storm, every betrayal, every moment when everything seemed to be collapsing at once, he had never heard her voice drop to that particular kind of quiet. That was not the quiet of someone thinking. That was the quiet of someone remembering. "Who is he?" Daniel asked. Victoria turned from the window. She looked at him for a long moment before she answered, and when she did, her voice was controlled in that way that only people hiding enormous pain managed to sound controlled. "Someone I hoped I would never have to explain." "Then explain him now," Daniel said, "because whatever you're feeling right now is telling me this is far worse than anything Warren ever tried." She sat down slowly. "Warren was a bully with money," she said. "Richard is something else entirely. He doesn't come at you with noise. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't even raise his voice." She paused. "He simply rearranges the world around you until you have nothing left to stand on." Daniel pulled a chair close and sat directly across from her. "Then we face him the same way we faced Warren. Together." Victoria looked at him with something painful in her eyes, something that looked almost like grief. "Daniel," she said softly, "you don't understand what you're offering to walk into." "Then help me understand." But she couldn't finish, or wouldn't. She shook her head slowly, stood up, and told him she needed the night to think. Daniel drove home with the weight of that unfinished sentence sitting on his chest like a stone. He never knew that before he reached his apartment building. Richard Hayes was already watching him through hidden cameras installed inside one of Victoria's abandoned commercial properties across the street. He never knew that Richard had been watching both of them for weeks. That the photograph was not a warning, it was a greeting. A signal that the game Victoria had spent over 20 years running from had just officially begun again. Richard sat in a dark room surrounded by screens. He was not a large man. He did not look like a villain. He looked like someone's distinguished uncle, silver-haired, calm-eyed, patient in the way that only people who have never needed to rush look patient. He watched Daniel's car disappear around the corner, and then he said something quietly to the empty room. "She still believes she escaped me." He smiled. Then he turned back to his screens. The first morning came and went without incident. Daniel told himself it was going to be fine. By the second morning, his phone had already started ringing with calls he didn't expect. His largest business partner called to say they were canceling their upcoming contract. The reason given was a vague reference to reassessing current commitments. Before Daniel could schedule a meeting to discuss it, 2 more clients sent formal termination letters within hours of each other. He assumed it was coincidence. By the end of that week, he had stopped calling it coincidence. Banks he had worked with for years began raising sudden flags on his accounts, not freezing them, not yet, just creating friction, delays, holds, requests for documentation that had never been required before. His accountant called confused. His lawyer said he had never seen anything like it without an active legal action behind it. His office building manager contacted him to say the lease would not be renewing. The building was being sold. There was nothing to negotiate. Daniel hired another space within days, and before he could sign the new lease, the building owner called to say they had decided against new tenants for the foreseeable future. He still could not see it clearly. He kept telling himself there were explanations, business cycles, timing, coincidence layering on top of coincidence. Then a man he had done a personal favor for 3 years ago, a man who owed Daniel a significant sum of money and had been making quiet payments, suddenly filed a complaint with the business registry claiming Daniel had defrauded him. That was the moment Daniel sat very still at his desk and understood that this was not coincidence at all. He called Victoria. She picked up before the second ring, as though she had been holding the phone. "It's already starting," he said. She closed her eyes on her end of the call. He could feel it even through the phone. "Tell me everything," she said. He told her. Every cancellation, every bank delay, every sudden reversal from people who had no reason to turn against him. When he finished, the silence on her end lasted long enough that he checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Victoria, I know," she said quietly. "I recognize it, every single piece of it." "Then explain it to me." "He doesn't destroy people directly," she said slowly, as though choosing every word with extreme care. "He convinces the world they never deserve to exist in the first place. He plants small seeds of doubt in every direction until everyone around you has quietly decided you are never trustworthy. And the terrifying part is, nobody ever feels manipulated. Everyone thinks they made their own decision about you." Daniel stared at his desk. "This is what he did to you? Before?" "This is how he practiced," she said. The letter arrived that same afternoon. It was hand-delivered to Victoria's home address. No return name, no postage. Someone had walked to her door and placed it in her mailbox themselves. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single card, not even a full page. 6 words written in a careful, unhurried hand. "Watch carefully. This is only lesson 1. Victoria read the card 3 times. Then she set it down on her kitchen counter and stood there looking at it the way you look at something you already know is going to cost you more than you can afford. She called Daniel immediately. He sent a letter. "What does it say?" She read it to him. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's enjoying this." "He always does," Victoria said. "Enjoyment is the only thing he never hides." That night, Daniel arrived home late. He had spent the evening meeting with his lawyer and getting nowhere. He was exhausted in the specific way that comes not just from tiredness, but from the feeling that every effort is being quietly undone the moment you make it. He unlocked his apartment, dropped his keys on the counter, and walked to the kitchen. He filled a glass of water and stood drinking it in the dark. Then he turned around. Something was wrong. He couldn't immediately identify it. The apartment looked untouched. Nothing was obviously moved. Nothing was missing. Everything appeared to be exactly as he had left it. He stood very still in the kitchen doorway, and scanned the room carefully with the slow attention of someone who has lived alone long enough to know exactly how their own space is supposed to feel. Then he saw it. The photograph. The same photograph that had arrived with the original envelope, the one Victoria had set face down on her table, and that Daniel had eventually kept, was sitting on his dining table. He had not left it there. He had left it in the drawer beside his bed. He was completely certain of it. It was now sitting perfectly centered on the dining table, placed with a kind of careful precision that felt less like an accident and more like a statement. Someone had been inside his apartment. They had not stolen a single thing. They had simply moved one photograph. Daniel stood and looked at it for a long time. He did not touch it. His hands were completely steady because something had shifted inside him in that moment, beyond fear, beyond anger, into something quieter and more dangerous than either. He picked up his phone and called Victoria. He was inside my apartment. Victoria didn't speak. He didn't take anything, Daniel continued. He just moved the photograph, placed it in the center of my dining table and left. Still silence. Victoria, I need you to tell me everything. Not pieces, not what you think I can handle. Everything. She exhaled slowly on the other end. And then, for the first time, she began. If you are still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comments section, because this story is about to go somewhere that will change everything you think you understood. She told him the truth the way someone tells a truth they have been carrying alone for so long that saying it aloud feels like setting down something unbearably heavy. Years before the woman he knew existed, before the business, before the reputation, before any of the success that had made Victoria a name people recognized. She had been young, brilliant, and completely unknown. She had come from nothing. She had taught herself everything she knew from borrowed books and late nights, and a refusal to accept limitations that other people kept trying to define for her. And then she met Richard Hayes. He had found her the way powerful men sometimes find exceptional people, not by accident, but by design. He had been watching her work from a distance for months before he ever introduced himself. He said he saw in her something rare. He said the world hadn't discovered her yet, but he had. He offered to be her mentor. Victoria had never had anyone believe in her the way Richard appeared to believe in her. He opened doors she hadn't known existed. He put her in rooms with people she had only read about. He taught her negotiation, strategy, how to read a room, how to build trust, how to turn a single conversation into a long-term alliance. Under his guidance, she grew faster than she had ever grown alone. She trusted him completely. That was the only word for it. Completely. I thought he was the reason I was going to make it, she told Daniel. Her voice was flat now, stripped of everything except the bare truth. I thought every good thing in my future had his hands behind it. What changed? Daniel asked. I started paying attention to things I wasn't supposed to notice, she said. He was always careful. But nobody is perfect. Small things. Documents that referenced deals I had never been told about. Names of people in positions they shouldn't have been able to reach without significant interference. Money moving through channels that didn't make sense given what I knew about his legitimate operations. She had begun quietly documenting what she found. She hadn't confronted him immediately. She had been careful. She had gathered evidence piece by piece over months, the same way he had taught her to build a strategy. Slowly, without showing your hand, until the moment you were certain. What she found was this. Richard Hayes had built a parallel empire beneath his legitimate one. An empire constructed entirely from corruption, manipulation, and the systematic destruction of anyone who ever got close enough to become inconvenient. He had been using Victoria's work, her analysis, her strategies, her carefully built relationships, as a kind of protective layer. A clean face on dirty foundations. If anything ever collapsed, the evidence pointing toward her would be overwhelming. The evidence pointing toward him would be buried. He built you as his shield, Daniel said quietly. Without ever telling me I was a shield, she said. When she had finally confronted him, not with anger, not with accusations, but with the quiet certainty of someone holding irrefutable proof. Richard had not raised his voice either. He had simply looked at her with those patient, silver-eyed eyes and said she had a choice to make. She could join him formally, accept her position in what he had built, and be protected. Or she could walk away and discover what the world looked like when Richard Hayes decided she was a liability. She had walked away. Within 6 weeks, federal investigators had received an anonymous filing containing evidence of financial crimes. The evidence pointed directly at Victoria. Her name was on documents she had never signed, connected to transactions she had never made, tied to decisions she had never been part of. The investigation nearly destroyed her. She spent everything she had on legal defense. She sold everything she couldn't protect. She disappeared from the life she had built and started over in the quiet, grinding, humiliating way that people start over when they have nothing left. She had never been convicted. The evidence eventually unraveled, not because justice worked perfectly, but because one investigator had been meticulous enough to notice that certain dates didn't align. She had been cleared, quietly, with none of the same noise the accusations had made, but Richard had never faced a single consequence. And Warren Cole? Daniel asked. Warren was a distraction, she said. I understand that now. Richard let Warren come at me. Let him exhaust himself, watch to see how I responded, whether I had become stronger or whether I had become someone he could approach. And the photograph? His way of saying he's decided. She paused. He's coming for everything I've rebuilt, Daniel, and he's starting with you because he knows that losing you will hurt me far more than losing anything else. Daniel sat with that for a long time. Then we don't give him what he wants, he said finally. You don't understand. I understand enough, he said. I understand he's counting on you to push me away to protect me, and I understand that if you do, you'll be facing him alone, which is exactly what he needs. So I'm not going anywhere. Tell me what we do next. Sabrina found out about Richard Hayes the way most people found out about threats that weren't aimed at them. Too late and through the wrong channels. Her accounts began experiencing issues on a Tuesday. By Thursday, every financial instrument she had access to had been either frozen or flagged for review. She called her bank and was told there was an ongoing regulatory matter. She called her financial advisor and was told he could no longer work with her pending the outcome of an investigation. She called 3 different lawyers before she found one willing to take her call, and that lawyer told her what she was describing sounded systemic. Systemic, Sabrina repeated, sitting alone in the apartment that suddenly felt very different now that she couldn't access the money that had furnished it. What does that mean? It means someone with significant reach decided you were a target, the lawyer said. These kinds of coordinated holds don't happen organically. She called Victoria. The irony was not lost on either of them. Sabrina, who had spent so much time and energy and calculated cruelty making Victoria's life smaller, was now calling Victoria because she had nowhere else to turn. Because the people she had cultivated during the years she was powerful were the kind of people who only answered calls from people who were still powerful. And right now, Sabrina was anything but. I know what's happening to you, Victoria said when she picked up. Then you know who's doing it? Yes. Sabrina's breath came out in a long, shaking exhale. Is this because of me? Because of what I did to you? Victoria didn't answer immediately. Victoria. Sabrina's voice broke slightly on the name. Just slightly. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know that. But please, is there anything... He's not doing this to punish you for what you did to me, Victoria said carefully. He's doing this to isolate me, to remove anyone who might stand beside me. But the effect is the same regardless of his reason. She paused. For the first time in your life, Sabrina, you are experiencing exactly what it feels like to have everything taken without warning and have no one believe you when you ask for help. The silence on Sabrina's end was its own kind of answer. I'm not going to abandon you, Victoria said finally. Not because you've earned my help. You haven't. But because letting Richard use you as a weapon against me means letting Richard win. And I am not going to let him win. Sabrina said nothing for a long moment. When she finally spoke, Her voice was smaller than Victoria had ever heard it. "Thank you." Victoria set the phone down and stood very still in her kitchen. She was not feeling generous or merciful or particularly evolved. She was feeling tired and determined, and something else she couldn't quite name yet, a feeling that was building slowly beneath everything else like pressure beneath a floor. Grace came back on a Wednesday morning. Daniel saw her first. He called Victoria immediately. "Grace is outside your building." Victoria was at her desk. She set down the papers she was reviewing. "How does she look?" "Frightened," Daniel said. "Real frightened. Not performed frightened." He let her in. Grace came upstairs and stood in Victoria's living room looking like someone who had not slept in days. Her clothing was slightly wrong in the way clothing gets when you've been wearing it longer than you intended. Her eyes were moving the way eyes move when someone has been in a situation where they needed to watch all directions at once. "He took me," Grace said without preamble. "Richard. He had people approach me and I didn't understand until it was too late. He kept me somewhere for days. He talked to me." She stopped. "What did he say?" Victoria asked. "He told me about you. Things I didn't know. He said he wasn't my enemy. He said you were keeping things from everyone around you because you were protecting yourself, not them." She looked at Victoria directly. "I didn't believe him. But he kept talking, and some of it started to sound like the truth," Victoria said quietly. Grace blinked. "Richard is very good at finding the pieces of the truth that hurt," Victoria said. "He wraps lies inside them. That's why he's difficult to resist." "What did he give you?" Grace reached into the bag she was carrying and produced a thick folder. "He said this is what he had planned for all of you. He said I could take it and bring it to you because he wanted you to find it. But I think he's wrong. I think this is real. I think he made a mistake and didn't realize what he handed me." Daniel took the folder. He opened it carefully. Inside was what appeared to be a comprehensive operational document. Names, dates, financial structures. A network of allies Richard had deployed. A chain of command, references to a hidden ledger that contained records connecting dozens of powerful figures to the infrastructure Richard had built over 20 years. "If this ledger exists and we find it," Daniel said slowly, reading through the pages, "his entire network collapses." "That's what he said," Grace confirmed. "He said no one could touch the ledger because only he knew where it was kept." Victoria sat very still. She was reading over Daniel's shoulder. Her face was composed, but her eyes were moving quickly. "There's an address here," Daniel said. "I see it," Victoria said. Daniel looked at her. "You don't look convinced." "I'm never convinced when something appears exactly when I need it," she said. But the folder was detailed. Too detailed to dismiss easily. They spent the rest of the day examining it, cross-referencing what they could verify against what they already knew. Some of it checked out. Names they recognized in positions that aligned with what the documents claimed. Structures that matched patterns Victoria remembered from years ago. By evening, Daniel had made a decision. "We go," he said. Victoria looked at him. "And if it's wrong? If we don't go and the ledger exists, we've handed Richard the only thing that could have ended this." She nodded slowly. "We go." They arrived at the location in the early morning before full light. An old commercial building, the kind of place that had once been something and was now simply a structure waiting to be repurposed. Daniel moved, carefully. Victoria stayed close. They found their way through the ground floor, following the instructions in the folder exactly. The room the folder had directed them to was at the end of a long corridor. Daniel opened the door. The shelves were empty, not recently cleared. Empty in the way shelves are when nothing has been on them for a long time. No dust patterns where files might have rested. No marks on the floor where furniture had been moved. Just a bare room that had clearly been bare for years. There was no ledger, no documents, no Richard, nothing, except for the wall directly across from the door. Someone had written on it in large, careful letters, Victoria, you still choose trust over wisdom. The silence in the room was absolute. Daniel turned around very slowly. He looked at Victoria. He looked at the empty shelves. He looked at the message on the wall. And then something cold settled into his understanding with a completeness that felt almost physical. "Where is Grace?" he said. Victoria was already reaching for her phone. Grace's line rang once and disconnected. Rang again and went to a number that no longer existed. Daniel stood in that empty room and understood the full shape of what had just happened. The folder, the fear, the detailed documents that checked out just enough to be credible, the address provided at exactly the right moment, all of it constructed to get them into a room together, following a path, trusting a source, and in doing so revealing everything they had gathered, every strategy they had built, every contact and plan and countermeasure they had developed over weeks. Grace had never been kidnapped. She had been sent. She was working for him, Daniel said. Not a question. Victoria didn't answer. She was standing very still in the center of the empty room, looking at the words on the wall, and something in her face had changed. Not collapsed. Victoria didn't collapse, but something underneath had shifted. The way a foundation shifts before you can see it in the surface above. Daniel walked to her. He didn't say anything immediately. He stood beside her and let the silence exist for a moment without trying to fix it. "Everything we had," she said finally. Her voice was barely above speaking level. "Everything we'd built, every piece of information, he has all of it now." "Yes," Daniel said. "This is my fault. Not self-pity. Just fact." I wanted to believe her. I knew better, and I still wanted to believe her. "We both read those documents," Daniel said. "We both decided." "But I knew," she said. "I know how he works. I know exactly how he layers truth inside lies until the lie becomes indistinguishable. And I still chose it because—" She stopped. "Because you wanted it to be over," Daniel said. She looked at him. "Because you've been carrying this for 20 years, he said quietly. "And when something appeared that looked like an ending, you reached for it. That's not a failure of wisdom, Victoria. That's what it costs to be human." She looked away, looked back at the words on the wall. Then she turned and walked toward the door. That night, Victoria sat alone in her living room long after Daniel had gone. The apartment was quiet. The city outside was doing what cities do, existing in its constant, indifferent motion. And she was sitting in the middle of it, feeling something she had not allowed herself to feel in longer than she could remember clearly. She had spent 20 years being strategic, 20 years being careful, 20 years building something strong enough that no one could take it from her again. She had been disciplined and precise and relentlessly forward-facing, because looking backward at what Richard had taken from her in those early years meant feeling things she couldn't afford to feel while she was still building. Now everything she had rebuilt was in danger. And worse, Daniel, who had done nothing except stand beside her with a loyalty she had not asked for and did not deserve, had lost nearly everything he had as well. When Daniel arrived the next morning and found her sitting in the same position she had been in the night before, he sat across from her without comment and waited. "This is what he wanted," she said finally. "He wanted me to see exactly what it costs to have someone stand beside me. He wanted me to feel that cost so completely that I would send you away." "I know," Daniel said. "He's been destroying your business, your reputation, everything you spent years building." Her voice was steady and terrible in its steadiness. "Because of me. Because of him," Daniel said. "I should have faced him alone from the beginning," she said. "And what would that have accomplished?" Daniel's voice was calm but direct. "You would have been isolated. Exactly where he needed you. He wants you alone, Victoria. He has always wanted you alone because he knows exactly how strong you are when you have someone beside you. And he's afraid of it." She looked at him. "If I had to lose everything again just to keep you standing," Daniel said quietly, "I would." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. She had survived things that should have broken her. She had rebuilt herself from nothing twice. She had learned to be strong in ways most people never needed to learn. But sitting across from Daniel in the early morning light, hearing those words said with the specific quietness of someone who means every syllable, something inside her came apart. Not catastrophically, not visibly, but genuinely. She cried, not from fear, not from loss, from something more specific and more painful than either. From the guilt of knowing that someone else's goodness had become a weapon used against them simply because they had chosen to stand beside her. Daniel didn't move closer or farther away. He simply stayed. Richard watched the footage from a camera positioned in the building across from Victoria's apartment. He had a view of her living room through the window. Not close enough for sound, but close enough to see. He watched her cry. He watched Daniel stay. He watched the scene with the patience of someone who has been waiting for a very specific outcome and has just witnessed it. He leaned back in his chair and said nothing for a long time. He believed in that moment that she was broken, that the combination of Daniel's losses and Grace's betrayal in the empty room had finally done what Warren Cole could not do and what 20 years of distance could not do. He believed Victoria was finally finished. What Richard did not see was what happened after the footage ended for the night. What happened after the lights in Victoria's apartment went dark and Daniel drove home alone through the quiet city. In his car, stopped at a light with the city moving around him, Daniel made a decision that he told no one. Not Victoria, not his lawyer, not anyone. He was going to end this, not through legal strategy or gathered evidence or careful planning. Through something Richard would never anticipate because it required the one quality Richard had always underestimated in the people around Victoria: willingness to sacrifice. The envelope arrived the next night, slid under Daniel's apartment door while he was asleep. He found it in the morning. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single document, a business contract dated years ago. Formal language, corporate structure, financial terms. He read it through once quickly, and then a second time more carefully. The signature at the bottom was Victoria's name, her handwriting or something extraordinarily close to it. But the date. He read the date 3 times. The contract was dated years before Victoria had ever, by her own account, by the timeline she had shared with him in detail, met Richard Hayes. Before their mentorship, before any of the events she had described. If this document was real, it meant Victoria had been connected to Richard's operations long before she claimed to have known him. Daniel sat with this for a very long time. He could feel the pull of what Richard intended. The doubt, the specific corrosive uncertainty that a document like this was designed to produce. You couldn't dismiss it easily. It was too detailed, too formal, too much like the real thing. But you also couldn't simply accept it, because accepting it meant accepting that Victoria had lied about everything. He drove to her apartment. He showed her the document without explanation. He simply placed it on her kitchen table and waited. Victoria looked at it. She picked it up. She read it. He watched her face while she did. He saw something he had not expected. Not guilt, not calculation. Not the micro-expressions of someone searching for an explanation. He saw genuine confusion. And then he saw something that looked like recognition of a different kind, not recognition of a memory, but recognition of a method. She set the document down. "That signature," she said very quietly, "isn't mine." Daniel looked at her. He believed her. He didn't know why he believed her with such immediate completeness, but he did. Something in the way she said it, not defensive, not insistent, but simply certain, made the alternative impossible to hold on to. "Then it's another fabrication," he said. "A very good one," she said. He had years to prepare this. He would have had access to my real signature from the years I worked with him. He could have had this prepared. Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number. They both looked at it. He answered and put it on speaker. The voice was calm. Not loud, not theatrical, not performative. Just calm. A voice that had learned a long time ago that it didn't need to perform power because it simply had it. Now you're finally asking the right questions, Daniel. The call ended. One sentence. That was all. Daniel walked to the window. He looked down at the street below. The city was going about its ordinary night. Cars, lights, people moving through their ordinary lives without any idea that something terrible and significant was happening above them in this apartment. Then he saw him, across the street, beneath a streetlight, standing perfectly still in a pale coat, looking up. Richard Hayes. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't skulking. He was simply standing there in the open, looking up at the window where Daniel stood. And he was smiling the specific smile of someone who has been waiting for a very long time for this exact moment to arrive. Daniel didn't move. He stood at the window and looked back. For 10 seconds, 15, 20. Then Richard turned slowly, stepped away from the streetlight, and walked into the darkness between buildings. One moment he was there, and then, completely without drama, he was simply gone. The streetlight illuminated empty pavement. Daniel stood at the window for a long time after that. Victoria came to stand beside him. Neither of them said anything. The city moved below them, ordinary and indifferent and completely unaware. The screen fades to black. To be continued. Life has a way of testing us through the people who claim to understand us most. Richard Hayes is terrifying not because of his power or his money, but because he weaponizes trust. He spent years studying Victoria, learning how she thinks, what she loves, where she is most vulnerable. And then he waited. He let Warren Cole exhaust himself. He let time pass. He waited until the moment Victoria had built something worth destroying again. And then he returned. The lesson this story carries is one most of us have encountered in some form. The people who can hurt us most are rarely strangers. They are the ones who were close enough to learn us, the ones who knew which doors were unlocked. Richard is a reminder that wisdom must walk beside loyalty, that trusting completely without watching carefully is a vulnerability, not a virtue. But Daniel is the counter lesson, because alongside every Richard Hayes in this world, there are people who choose to remain, not because they don't see the danger. Not because they don't understand the cost, but because they have decided that some people are worth the price of standing beside them. And Victoria, who has survived more than most people are ever asked to survive, is learning, perhaps for the first time, that strength is not always the refusal to need anyone. Sometimes strength is allowing someone to stay. Thank you for watching this far. It means more than you know. Tell us in the comments what you enjoyed most about this chapter. The suspense, the characters, the emotional turns, the twist with grace, or something else entirely. We read every single comment, and your responses shape where this story goes next. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect moment. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you are there the moment the next chapter drops. Because what Richard is about to reveal about that forged signature will change everything you think you know about this story. We will see you in the next one.